And that jarring cacophony tells you it's the Power of Three podcast once again. I'm Kenny Smith, and today we're continuing our ongoing mission through the printed page, looking at Doctor Who novels, and of course 2026 marks the 35th anniversary of the publication of the first original Doctor Who novel, Time Worm Genesis, but we'll have more about that later in the year. Today we're looking at a First Doctor adventure, and this one is Salvation, which was written by Steve Lyons. Let's have a look at the cover. It's got that slightly over metallic Doctor Who logo from the TV movie, and then we have a greenish background with clouds. There's the Empire State Building, there's what appears to be a sun behind it, and there's a screen grab of the First Doctor with his left hand up and a finger to his lips, as if to say, my boy, thinking about something, which he no doubt was. It reminds me for some reason of the Crusade video cover, which was released probably a little bit before this, but it's a very similar colour scheme from Black Sheep. But I rather like it. Let's pop the book over and look at the back cover. It tells us, the gods have returned, and they're here to save our world. New York, 1965. A time of conflict between ideologies, races, generations and genders, when crime runs rife and an unpopular war drags on in a distant land. In the midst of this turmoil, people cry out to their gods. And now it seems the gods have answered the call. Walking the slums and tenements of downtown Manhattan, demonstrating extraordinary powers, 5 strangers are gathering a growing crowd of worshippers. Stephen wants to believe in miracles, but the Doctor is more sceptical. What are the strangers' real motives? And why does history make no mention of these events? As New York begins to tear itself apart, the Doctor's principles are tested to their limits. Which side should he choose to help? And what part will a London schoolgirl named Dorothea Chaplet play in the ensuing chaos? What price is humankind willing to pay for salvation? And of note, Salvation was the 17th novel in the BBC Past Doctor Adventure series and was released on the 4th of January 1999, if you want to be Chang Lee, and featured the First Doctor Stephen Taylor and Dodo, and this was the first time that this trio had featured in an original novel. Now, before we go on, we're going to hear from the man who commissioned this book. So let's roll out the red carpet for the first time this year and welcome once again to the Power of Three, the range editor, back in the day, the one and only Mr. Steve Cole.
Hello, I'm Steve Cole, and long ago, I was the editor of Salvation by Steve Lyons.
Not salvation in general as a concept to save our souls.
I was not the salvation of Steve Lyons, but the money might have been at times, I don't know.
So this was his third book for you after The Murder Game and, of course, the very popular Witch Hunters.
Yes, and I really liked working with Steve. It's quite surprising that he went straight on to do another Hartnell after doing The Witch Hunters, isn't it? But in fact, there weren't so many people wanting to do Hartnell stories, and which I thought was a shame, because Hartnell is, I've got a big strong place for Hartnell inside, and it's one of the reasons I ended up writing 10 Little Aliens for Justin, because I think he was still finding people less willing to write for Hartnell. But Steve was one of those writers who's happy to write for any of the Doctors. And, when you're an editor arranged like that and you've got 22 slots to fill and, it's relentless, what you really want is someone good and professional who's going to come in and deliver something that is, good and interesting and doesn't need a shit ton of work doing to it. So Steve was great for that. I was always really happy when he came in with another idea, and I can't recall turning down any ideas by Steve. He may remember differently, but I was Yeah, always happy to have Steve Lyons on the list.
I'd imagine that this would be a story that'd be slightly more problematic today, given that it involves gods and belief and religion and faith.
Yeah, I suppose it depends how you look at things. We see in the latest seasons of Doctor Who, these things are touched upon. But yes, it's seen through no kind of a prism, really, is it? It's just in Salvation, these are the gods, and they're here in New York and Wimbledon Common, as I recall. I liked the way that Steve decided that he wanted to enlarge Dodo's first appearance in the show by showing what she was actually running from, and obviously embellishing that and making it much more dramatic and sci-fi than I imagine the original production team had in mind. But that's what the books are there for, for filling in gaps imaginatively. So I liked that Dodo has actually started off on her own alien adventure before she got into the TARDIS. And then, having Hartnell in New York, again, it's very different to his last time there in The Chase. Slightly more significant goings on this time. But it was, I thought that was really good fun. Imagining how they would have realised some of that in 1966. There might have been some, cameras sent out to Central Park, to the sheep meadow, to do some establishing shots, and then you'd cut to this terrible 4-inch square plot of grass in front of a railing and try to recreate it. I always had the edict that the past Doctor adventures should be like the original TV shows, but in widescreen, in Cinerama, and this, I think, is a very good example of that, reaching way beyond the meagre budgets of the time to deliver a Doctor Who story which nevertheless has the characters that stay very, very true to their origins.
You used the phrase Hartnell in New York. I've now got images of some sort of like jazz tune to that name and just being played but laid back in a saxophone and clarinet in a club somewhere.
He is an alien. He's an illegal alien. Oh no, that was by Mike Tucker and Robert Perry, of course. He's a Hartnell in New York. Yeah, that could work quite well.
And a lovely cover too, very reminiscent of the video for the Crusade at that point, and the Space Museum, given that it's that similar sort of greenish colour in the background.
Yes.
The colour for covers is green.
It is. Maybe it's sheep meadow green. Maybe that's what they were aiming for. Yes, it's a lovely classic colour, not too busy. It was nice to have just the two elements of the Statue of Liberty and Hartnell's head. Is there a swirl there? There's probably a swirl there. Or is it a cloud? They might have moved on to clouds by then. A cloud, yeah. They moved on to the clouds once we'd exhausted the variety of swirls that we had available at the time.
Brilliant. Steve, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for that, Stephen. Thank you for, as always, your time, and fingers crossed I'll not have to bother you too often in 2026, but that's not going to happen, is it? Oh well. Anyway, let's pause once more and hear an excerpt from the book, and this is read for us by Craig Brawley.
Dodo's first impression of New York was that it was smaller than she had expected. No, not smaller, more confined. The streets were narrower than those of home, the buildings packed more tightly. But when Dodo looked up, she could see those same buildings towering above her. Through a curtain of drizzle, the distant sky was barely visible. She almost felt claustrophobic, but the sheer thrill of being in a foreign locale, of its unique atmosphere, counteracted the effect. It was early morning. Time on the east coast of America ran 5 hours behind that in Wimbledon, if she remembered correctly. But the air tingled, as if the city was poised to explode into action. This was like a vivid dream, but it was real. Dodo had dreamt it often enough to know the difference. The past hour had been like that, a whirlwind of incredible experiences. There had been Joseph, of course, and his attempt to do what he had tried to do. But even that seemed distant now, as if it had happened to somebody else. There simply hadn't been time for it to sink in. Not since Dodo's frenzied dash for freedom and the police box that had opened at her touch and allowed her into a magical realm. The police box, she now knew, was a shell containing the most fantastic thing she had ever seen. At her first glimpse of the white, oversized, futuristic control room. She had panicked, had even imagined for a giddy, insane second that she had escaped from Joseph to run headlong into his spaceship. She had blurted out some story about wanting to call the police. She couldn't recall the reason she had given now, speaking in her roughest, most common playground voice. The machine's owner, a white-haired old man in prehistoric dress, long black jacket, checked trousers and a cravat, had dismissed her as an unimportant child, as she had hoped. But by now, she had calmed down, had begun to feel both safe, why was that, and curious, well, nothing unusual there. The old man had told Dodo to leave, but she had reeled off questions instead, obstreperous as she could be when she set her mind on something. His answers had been vague. He had called himself a doctor of science, which presumably made him the machine's inventor. But further interrogation had been forestalled by the inventor's assistant, Stephen, who had charged in, shouting something about policemen. The old man had operated a series of controls on a hexagonal bank, and an argument had ensued, one that made a lot more sense in retrospect, now that Dodo knew what the police box was capable of. The doctor had not wanted the local bobbies to stumble upon his machine. He had decided to move it, but Stephen had protested about their taking a teenaged girl with them. Not that Dodo had minded. She had waited years for a fairy tale chance like this. Her parents, she had told the men, were dead, and her great aunt didn't care what she did. A slight exaggeration. She wished to go with them. Stephen had tried to put her off with some stupid yarn about travelling into space. Was he one of those embarrassing squares who thought kids needed to be patronised? But the inventor had taken to her, and the decision appeared to be his. Thus, Dodo found herself stepping outside the police box, which, from the outside, really was as small as it had seemed back home, so that was something else to wonder about, in New York City, after only 20 minutes. And though the doctor, his only name apparently, and Stephen, were busy fussing inside, complaining that the machine hadn't worked properly, she was overjoyed with what it had achieved. This still seemed like a dream, but at least it was a happy one now.
Thanks, as always, to Craig for his time in doing that, and he'll be back later with a second reading. So, without further ado, let's now speak to Steve. The other Steve. The main Steve, if you will. The man who actually wrote the book. Welcome to the author.
I'm Steve Lyons, and a long time ago I wrote the BBC Past Doctor adventure, Salvation.
So Steve, you'd already got a First Doctor novel to your credit already with The Witch Hunters, so how did this one come around?
I'm not sure I remember all that well. I think I enjoyed writing the First Doctor. I wanted to do it again. I think at the time it would probably have been my preference to tackle one of the Doctors I hadn't. But at that point I'd written enough novels that I was able to talk to the editor, who was Steve Cole at the time, and find out what he hadn't had submissions for. And for some reason it seemed that people weren't too keen on submitting stories with the 60s Doctor, which is why I had a bit of a run of First and Second Doctor stories in the Past Doctor adventures. It was the quickest way of getting commissioned. But as I said, I really did enjoy writing the First Doctor. It's one of my favourite ones to write for, I think, and I switched up the companions, so it was a chance to write for Stephen and Dodo, who I hadn't before.
Of course, Dodo had a memorable previous outing in the Missing Adventures.
She had.
And here we go, you actually get to give her effectively her introduction that we never got properly on screen. We just get her running and we find out why, having been to visit poor old Mr. Miller and then found that he had been killed by an alien.
Right. Yeah, some of that rings a bell. I know Virgin had produced this in the New Adventures days, or the Missing Adventures days. Virgin had produced this list of Doctor Who stories and which ones had gaps between them and which ones couldn't. And I think some of us just liked looking at some of them and saying, but you could squeeze something in there, you could. And the thing that I latched onto with Dodo is that when she arrives on the Ark, she's absolutely insistent that the TARDIS kind of travelled in time, but she's perfectly willing to believe that it's teleported across London to Whipsnade Zoo. So it had this daft idea that it was actually okay for her to have an adventure set before the arc, as long as it was set on contemporary Earth. Because otherwise, I can't remember the details, but I think it's quite difficult to squeeze a story in for that team. And I know Celestial Tormaker runs straight into the Gunfighters.
Yep.
I think the Gunfighters run straight into the Savages, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, that's right. So, yeah, it's a not very easy place to slot them into, unless, of course, there's a missing scene between the end of, now we must return to the TARDIS, my boy.
Yes.
And then it slots in there before we get to the TV moment. Yeah, that's my way of doing it. They managed to do that a few times with what happens after the smugglers with "This is the coldest place on Earth," so
yes,
you're in good company.
Yeah.
So you've taken the TARDIS across the Atlantic to West 25th Street in New York City. And, of course, that gives us a chance to see the Statue of Liberty, which memorably appears on the cover. Had you been to NYC at this point?
Yes, I did. I'd been the year before, so that's probably why I did that. I actually did a little trip after I delivered The Witch Hunters and I was waiting for comments on it. I actually did a little trip over to see Salem, because I thought this is going to be my last chance to do it and get what I find in the Doctor Who book. I don't want to, go there in a few. I wanted to go there, and I thought if I do it in a few years' time, I'll find things that should have gone in the book. So I went to Salem, and I'd always wanted to see New York, so I got a plane that changed in New York and spent a night there as well. So yeah, but I suppose that trip was for both my Hartnell New Adventures in the end, and past adventures.
Yeah, at least you're doing your research properly, Steve. Can't be accused of not.
That's a bit, yeah. I mean, it wasn't 1965 when I was there. That was, but what I did, pre-internet days or early internet days, I went into Manchester Central Library and I spent a day looking at 1965 issues of the New York Times on microfiche, just to get an idea of the sort of issues that were being talked about in New York at the time.
Yeah, I just hope these trips were tax deductible. But we'll not go into that. We shall move on swiftly. So how did you find writing for Dodo, given that, on screen, she's sort of like she's very sort of positive and loyal to the Doctor and Stephen.
Yeah.
But there's always those elements there, sort of like you're bringing in like a bit of a sad backstory with what happened to her mum and dad and indeed her great aunt Margaret.
Yeah, and it's and it was a bit early days as well, so you don't want it to be, completely fully formed and loyal to them at that moment. She's still a bit out of her depth and not knowing what's going on. And then one of the things I remember doing was feeling I had to tackle some of the inconsistencies with the character, like the change in accents. So yeah, it became about just finding a way through all those different versions of her.
Yeah. How about Stephen?
I found him a bit easier. I tried to give him a bit more backstory as well, because he gets absolutely none. I mean, just nothing. But I think Peter Purvis does an amazing job with that character of taking this character with no real backstory, but just making him so relatable, making him the everyman that we identify with. And as with a lot of characters, once I've seen enough of that and I can become familiar with that, I just sort of internalized his way of speaking and his mannerisms, and so it becomes quite easy for me to just try to invoke that in the text.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I think that what Peter Purvis did was fantastic, and just being able to sort of like, now hang on a minute, and all those moments like that, he's sort of quite forceful. And
yeah, I think I tried to remember as well that this is quite ancient history for him, because that's I tried to put a little touch of that in, because that's not always something that you see, and because I was thinking a lot about time travel paradoxes in Doctor Who at the time, and still do, really. The idea that for Dodo this is a contemporary story, but for Stephen this is a historical story. So are the rules different? Does he worry about what he can change? Yeah,
of course we get introduced fairly early on to the Church of the Latter-day Pantheon, or indeed its members. And I suppose that must be an interesting thing when you're creating a villainous race that are gods. I mean, I suppose nowadays with the TV show they'd have to be far more careful for fear of potentially offending people, particularly across the Atlantic, whereas back in the good old days it was just a case of go on, do what you like, pretty much, just don't put in anything really blasphemous.
Yeah, I think you're okay as long as it's not a specific religion. I think people are quite happy to be blasphemous against everybody else's religions. I mean, it was what I did was a bit of a trope at the time. I mean, Star Trek had done it at least once. The benevolent alien gods that offer you everything, and the twist I wanted to do on that was that they always turn out to be evil. It always turns out to be part of a scheme, and what I wanted to do was, well, what if it wasn't, and what if them coming down and offering everything was just a bad thing anyway?
Very interesting characters amongst them. You've got Norman, Max, Dennis, Jennifer, and the Patriarch, as well as Joseph. I think when you're sort of creating all these names, and with a name like the Patriarch, of course, that's going to give them that sort of little resonance. It's when you've got the definitive object of anything like the Doctor, the Master, the Rani, the Patriarch, it gives them that instant authority.
I think so, and I was probably thinking about, like Norse and Greek and Roman gods, where they all have like the All-Father figure. He was usually named, but I thought the title was probably, like you say, more iconic.
Yep, because I think you mentioned that he'd claimed to have manifested as Zeus, Jupiter, Odin, and
did I actually say that?
many other gods. Yes, but I suppose with these sort of issue rules, pseudo Doctor Who science.
Well, yes, yeah, that's it. They wouldn't bother these days, would they? Which I think is a shame. But it still needed to be. For me, it still needs to be quite powerful aliens. It still needs to have that veneer of actually being science.
Yeah,
just science that we don't know yet.
That's it, indistinguishable from magic.
Yep.
And of course, Stephen gets to have a bit of a friend in Kathy Marchant, and they get on very well as riots start to break out, because that was one of the things I really remembered from this, was the fact that everything's going so well, and then it just sort of slips into chaos.
Yeah. Despite
the best intentions of everyone.
Yeah, as I say, that was very much the thing, that it's not actually an evil plot. It's just that it's how humanity would react to that situation. I think that was what I was interested in, and that's where my reading of the New York Times came in handy, seeing where the fault lines in society were at the time, and which groups would be asking different things of the gods, and how those requests would come into conflict.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was very much the arc of the book.
Because I think the core of it is the gods can only do whatever the people believe they can do.
Yes.
And therefore all things become possible that way for different gods for different people. A bit like the Romans again, and the Greeks.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. There's some quite dark stuff there as well, when there's the gods effectively commit suicide, or the Doctor realises that if they go through their gateway, then that's them, gone. And again, that's quite a dark territory to go, particularly in First Doctor era.
Right. I have no memory of that, I'm afraid. It's a weird one. It's I don't know why I've forgotten so much about Salvation.
I mean, there's moments when the gods suddenly decide to turn on the people and start killing them for the long-term good, which a phrase that I suppose is sort of starting to creep in, sadly, a bit more to real life these days.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, all the issues we have now were around at the time. They might have been magnified a bit these days. Yeah, it was. But when I look back at it, sometimes I think maybe it was a little bit dark for that era, especially some of the stuff that I put on Dodo so early on. And I'm wondering if nowadays I'd lighten up on some of that. But I mean, that was the way some of the books were going at the time, and others weren't. And I think I just decided to try it for that one.
Yeah. Well, the gods themselves may not have had evil motivations. We did, of course, have the very flawed human Alexander Lullington Smythe, who was a theatrical agent and wanted effectively to be the agent of the gods. And that's the sort of character that must be a real dream to write for. You can sort of give him that Henry Gordon Jago-esque flourish of the showman who never quite made it himself, but here we are with the others.
Yeah. Yeah, something a bit ridiculous and larger than life is always fun to put in there, especially in a serious situation. just to puncture it a bit. Yeah, he's probably the character I remember best out of that.
And of course, you do get the cheeky reference into the fact that he later writes a book, Pray for a Miracle, starring Peter Cushing as the mysterious government advisor, Doctor Who.
Right.
Mr. Lyons, I put it to you that you're
Yes.
breaking that fourth wall yet again.
I know. I see now. I tried to stop doing it after going full on with the first 2 new adventures, but sometimes you just can't resist it.
Yeah, it is good fun when you're able to do that. I think that sort of thing, it's allowed. If you know, it's not obvious.
Yeah.
And of course, people being people, they do what they always do, and they turn against their gods.
Yeah. Unfortunately, once again, I don't remember that. I think it's the last third of the book I've just blanked on. So I remember the setup. I don't remember how it ends. I suppose, I mean, it's a book that I suppose it got decent enough reviews at the time, but it's not one of the ones that's talked about, whereas like the Witch Hunters and the Crooked Road House, although they're the ones I remember, whereas Salvation, I was perfectly happy with it at the time, but it's faded a lot in my memory.
That's funny, because it's one that, vividly, I mean, as I said to you when I dropped you the email to see if you fancy chatting about it, I read it twice in that first month because I really enjoyed it so much. I just enjoyed the gods element, and again, sort of an element of comics perhaps creeping in there as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the gods. When I mentioned Norse and Greek gods before, I mean, I'm thinking very much the Marvel Comics versions, and I think a lot of my understanding of them is based on that.
Yeah, I think it's just that there is something sort of very comic visual about them in that sense, which is interesting. And of course, poor Dodo, she gets close to Joseph, and she ultimately, of course, declines, and they return to the TARDIS. And the Doctor cleverly tells the people there's an unarmed bomb, and they believe it. And there's a bit of jiggery pokery by telling everybody it was all an April Fool's Day prank, and life carries on, which allows everybody to get back to the TARDIS.
Yeah, and in those days we still needed that plausible deniability, didn't we? Where if you're going to have an alien invasion in plain sight, then there has to be, however improbable, there has to be a reason why people dismiss it as a hoax afterwards.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you really are messing with history.
Yeah, we can all do that sleight of hand that Russell T would do after the next Doctor or whatever.
Yeah.
And everybody forgot somehow.
Yeah. I think at least in the old days we tried to give some reason.
Yeah. Just that you mentioned there the reaction to the book. It's got a score of 3.43 on Goodreads.
Okay.
And that's not bad at all. And so yeah, it's a book that people generally like. There's not a lot of dislike for it. It's obviously pleasing for an author that people don't dislike it. The ratings are in the upper side.
Oh yeah. It's always nice when people don't hate what you've written. Yeah.
So how would you sum up Salvation looking back on it?
I remember what I do remember about it. I remember quite fondly. I think, I'd like to say it was a deliberate attempt to do more of a comic strip thing. I like that. There might be some stuff I pull back on, particularly with the treatment of Dodo, when I think it could be a bit lighter rather than put too much on the character. But like I say, it was a bit of a joke at the time how badly she was treated, and I wanted to make fun of that a bit. maybe was the wrong impulse. But yeah. Overall, I'm pretty proud of it.
Good.
I've done better books, but I've also written worse ones. So.
I think it's lovely, and it's absolutely seamless the way it fits in, given that Dodo, as you say, is quite unfazed by the TARDIS, really, and sort of like, oh.
So does that stands up, does it? That's that kind of link between the Massacre and the Ark.
Yeah, definitely does.
It doesn't seem like self-indulgent nonsense.
No, I mean, I think it's the thing is that at the time, I think the audios were just Steve Cole had sort of restarted the missing episodes audios, and it fits in nicely to Massacre. I have checked, just to confirm. I have been very meticulous in going back and listening. So there's nothing to imply that it couldn't happen in between. So there's a win. Fantastic. Steve, thank you once again.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much, as always, Steve. We really do appreciate the fact that the authors take time to come on and chat to us, and we've been lucky because ever since 2023. We've been speaking to the writers of these original novels, and by and large, I'd like to think everyone who's come on has had fun. So please stick with us, because we've got plenty more lined up, including some exclusives. Well, they're all exclusive technically, but yeah, we have some great chats coming very, very soon. So let's find out a little bit more about what happened later on in the book, and we'll hear another reading from Craig Brawley.
The Doctor halted midway along the Rainbow Bridge, some yards from the gods, as if afraid to approach them. But Joseph sensed no fear in him. He cleared his throat loudly, and Joseph realized that what he had to say was as much for the crowd as for the Pantheon. "I have a request," announced the Doctor. "I would like you to leave this world." And a hush fell upon the sheep meadow. The Patriarch laughed, slowly and deliberately. "You have always opposed our presence here, Doctor. Must we go through this argument once more? I have been proved right, have I not? You have killed again." He emphasized that final word, and Joseph felt its disconcerting effect upon the crowd. But many were still faithful. Some wanted to cry out, to hurl insults at this man who would come between them and their deities. They did not dare. "You have become all I suspected you would. You are arrogant and willful. You will bring destruction upon yourselves. I intend to ensure that you do not lay this world to waste too." "Ha!" the Patriarch snorted. He took a step forward, bringing his sandaled foot down hard upon the shimmering surface of the bridge. Such was the force of the gesture that the first few rows of the crowd shrank away as the Patriarch squared up to his challenger. "You are very concerned about this world, Doctor, for one who is alien to it." "Ah, yes, I see. You hope to turn these people against me by invoking a xenophobic reaction, Then perhaps, All-Father, you would like to expound upon your own origins for us. I think we would all like to hear them." "We are their gods." "No, these people have made you their gods. But there was a time before that, was there not?" The Doctor smiled. "Well, nothing to say. The mighty All-Father of the latter-day Pantheon, tongue-tied because he cannot bring himself to utter the simple truth?" "Father, no." This time Joseph saw the signs. He threw himself at the Patriarch, even as he gathered energy to strike. He was shrugged off easily. The All-Father rounded on him, ablaze with fury. "Can you not see?" Joseph pleaded. "You must not do this. You must not kill. It is what the Doctor wants." The Patriarch's anger was mixed with bewilderment. Joseph sensed his thoughts. Why would somebody throw away their life in such a manner? And the crowd. The crowd had seen their gods fighting amongst themselves. The Doctor had reached the foot of the bridge, walking slowly, leaning on his cane, his back resolutely turned to the gateway. And the Patriarch sensed what he had done, the crisis of faith that he had engendered, and was blinded by rage. "Doctor!" The old man turned and smiled, and was engulfed by a fireball, fully 3 times his size. Joseph could do nothing but watch, in open-mouthed horror. People started to scream.
Thank you so much, Craig. And he'll be back next week with some more readings for us. So what book will it be? Well, it's the second Doctor one. So be here and find out what it is. In the meantime, let's hear what the Contemporary Review had to say in Doctor Who magazine. This appeared in issue 274, and the reviewer was Dave Owen. He says, "A very long time ago indeed, your reviewer utterly revered the era of the First Doctor, despite never having seen an actual single William Hartnell episode, all thanks to the magnetism of the 3 first ever Doctor Who novels. Having absorbed and mostly enjoyed what there is of the televised First Doctor, it is comforting to return to that period in print and allow it to acquire a grace and a dignity, which were rather eroded by the realities of 60s as live television production. Perhaps significantly, there have been very few poor First Doctor novels, and Steve Lyons here maintains the standard of his previous The Witch Hunters. Steve's agenda must have been to flesh out the characters of Stephen Taylor and Dodo Chaplet beyond the bare bones given on television. He starts well by providing Dodo with an introduction which incorporates her first televised appearance, blundering into the TARDIS in the closing moments of Bell of Doom, the final episode of the story referred to on this book's jacket as The Massacre. Explaining away her schizophrenic dialect is a mere bonus in a book which has done more than the previous sum of televised stories and follow-on novels to make me feel like I know the character. Similarly, Stephen is given a background and motivation which explains perfectly not only his actions in this book, but his otherwise apparently rash decision to leave the Doctor and look after the Savages and the Elders a few stories later. Neither character is deepened just for the sake of it. This is a novel which embodies the proverb, "Be careful what you ask for, you may get it," since it concerns the arrival on Earth of beings known as gods, who possess supernatural abilities which enable them to be whatever those around them want them to be. This is a very intelligent choice of alien visitor for a writer to drop into New York City in 1965, since rather than overwhelming the rich and diverse culture present, the gods serve as a mirror to it. Illustration of life at ground level is provided by the italicised prefaces to each chapter, which provide excerpts of newsprint or excerpts from subsequent memoirs to frame and contextualise what follows. Later, there are even direct vox pops from various New Yorkers about the arrival of the gods. The whole thing reminds me equally of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' wonderful Watchmen graphic novel, about 50 superheroes coming out of retirement, and George R.R. Martin's Wildcard series of anthologies concerning the apotheosis of many ordinary New Yorkers. Salvation is peopled by characters who are instantly recognisable. The Girl reporter and her cup photographer, the cigar-chomping general, the FBI flying saucer investigator, the slimy entrepreneur, so that the scene is set by archetype. It is entirely appropriate that Salvation should be populated with familiar figures, since they offset perfectly the ambiguous nature of the gods themselves. Unlike the messiahs, who returned in last month's Where Angels Fear, these gods are not established deities, but rather ordinary-sounding beings who appear before their public in one of New York's parks, rather like the Beatles, just down the road at Shea Stadium. This novel is easy to enjoy. I slipped through the 274 pages effortlessly by being, once again, a straightforward idea told well, with development and description rationed out so that the second half is just as interesting as the first. A Hartnell story set in present-day New York without resorting to satire is utterly unimaginable, but by keeping the setting contemporary with the programme's era, Steve retains the First Doctor's integrity. It's perhaps a pity that BBC Worldwide has so narrowly missed the opportunity to cross-promote Salvation with the video release of The Ark, or even an audio release of The Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve. And with that being the only possible criticism, I'll pray for more where this came from. Let's have a look at the contemporary reaction from 2026. Salvation has a rating of 3.43 from 217 ratings and 24 reviews. 5 stars 15%, 4 stars 29%, 3 stars 40%, 2 stars 11%, 1 star 3%. Let's start with a 5-star review from Stephen Andrieshin. As can be assumed from the title, the book tackles the idea of religion and human spirituality through the lens of science fiction. In this regard, it is quite similar to Steve Lyons' other First Doctor book, The Witch Hunters, though in this one, both the thematic through line and alien plot points are much more explicit. 4 stars from Fionn Horrell. A great First Doctor story, which acts as an introduction to Dodo's character. While the story arc was fairly simple and at times slow-moving, I found the character developments, particularly those for Dodo and Stephen, more than made up for it. I found the book thoroughly enjoyable and very engaging. 9 out of 10. 3 stars, however, from Daniel Kukwa. This is one of those books where the characters easily outshine the plot. The story itself is an attempt to create a present-day style adventure in the manner of early attempts such as The War Machines, but I found it fairly humdrum. And the less said about the disturbing experience Dodo has with one of the characters in the novel, the better. That felt particularly out of place, but, plot aside, the actual characters shine, especially the regular cast. Steve Lyons has a great command of the First Doctor, but he also performs a miracle in giving Dorothea Dodo Chaplet, one of the most forgotten and cardboard companions in the canon, an actual character identity. 3 stars from Ivana Richards. Not quite as good as The Witch Hunters, but still very enjoyable until the end when it all gets rather silly. Yet again, Lyons focuses more on the companions than the Doctor and gives Dodo a nice backstory, something the TV show failed to do. All three central characters are well written. However, the aliens are missing a sense of threat in the main. They just sort of arrive and do very little until the end. Not the best of the first Doc novels, but nowhere near the worst either. And finally, 3 stars from Catherine. Good ideas about people's expectations of their god, or in this case gods, and appreciation of why a god should not and cannot accede to all prayers. Interesting science fiction setting for this message. Of course, the real godlike figure is the Doctor. Good to see some detailed characterisation of Dodo. I got to know more about her in this book than in Bunker Soldiers. Thank you, Catherine. Well, that's us. You can follow us on social media. We're at Power of 3 Pod on Twitter. We are at Finished Zine on Blue Sky, and we have a Facebook group too. If you've enjoyed the episode, you might want to consider giving us a review. You can do that by dropping into your podcatcher of choice and saying what you think. Hopefully positive. As ever, we're going to leave you with a song. And today's track comes from The Cranberries, and the song is called Salvation. But it does have themes of drug taking and such like in it, so if you're of a sensitive nature, you may not want to listen and had better switch off now. Until next time, I've been Kenny Smith. Bye bye.